Okay, well, let's get started. Again, thank you very much and welcome to our first Zoom meeting of the year on immigration matters. I appreciate the fact that you're taking your lunch hour and joining us here today, and hopefully the information will be helpful. So first of all, Happy New Year as well to everyone. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday season. And again, if you have questions as we go along, feel free to ask them. I'm happy to answer them. My name is Mike Sherman, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm with Sherman Immigration, PLLC. We're an immigration law firm that specializes in medical and business immigration, with an emphasis really on healthcare, physicians, nurses, physical therapists, and others. This has been our specialty for 30 years, and this is really the focus of what we do. So the first meeting of the year today will be about extraordinary ability green cards. And this is actually an interesting type of green card because, among other things, it's a self-petition, which means that you can petition on your own without an employer. We'll go more into depth into the requirements and the other aspects of this type of green card as we go along. But just as a start, two of the really overarching things we're going to be looking at today. Number one, what is the definition of extraordinary? I mean, this is an extraordinary ability green card. And I mean, Webster's dictionary describes or defines extraordinary ability as going beyond what is usual, regular, or customary, or exceptional to a very marked extent. So the question is, with that definition in mind, how does the Immigration Service define extraordinary ability? And that's something that we're going to look at today. Number two, the other thing to focus on is telling your story. In other words, you have a lot of accomplishments in the field, or you're going to have them over the coming years. How do you tell your story? And specifically, how do you make your story compelling to the immigration officer that will be adjudicating your application to the extent that the officer will use his or her discretion to go ahead and approve your application? So without further ado, what I'm going to do is start a slideshow, and we will, again, I'm happy to take questions as we go through this. So let me share my screen with you. This will just take a minute. Okay. Okay, great. So hopefully you can all see my screen at this point. And again, this is regarding extraordinary ability green cards. They're also known as EB-1 or employment-based one, even though it is a self-petition. So what is this type of green card? What does it mean? And what are we talking about today? So EB-1 is a category of green card, and there are actually three types. Extraordinary ability, which we'll be talking about today, outstanding professor or researcher, which is something different, and also multinational manager or executive. So again, today we're focusing on extraordinary ability, and this type of green card application requires you, the applicant, to prove that you're an individual who has risen to the top of your field. Now, with that being said, again, that may sound like an impossible mountain to climb, especially if you're a resident or fellow, but in reality, it is possible. The accomplishments that you have, the accomplishments that you will have over the coming years, there's a good chance that depending on the nature of those accomplishments, that you will be able to make that showing without showing that you have reached to the very top of your field. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the benefit of this is that it's a self-petition, which means it doesn't have to be sponsored by an employer. There's no job requirement or going through the onerous and very time-consuming labor certification process. So those things are not required. The nice thing is, as it says in the slide, you can sponsor yourself. Among other things, by filing this type of application, it's very helpful for people from certain countries who have huge backlogs in their green card category. Due to the high demand in certain green card categories, as we'll see on the next slide, establishing a priority date or a place in that backlog is critically important in trying your best to get a timely green card without having to wait years and years and possibly a decade or more. And finally on this slide, the I-140 approval or EB-1 approval allows you to obtain H-1B visa status beyond the usual 6-year limit. So as you may know, for people who are in an H-1B visa status, the normal limit is 6 years. And usually that's like hitting a brick wall. That is the limit, and it's not possible to go beyond it in many cases unless you first leave the US for a year, and then the clock sets back to 0. However, with an I-140 approval, whether it's EB-1 or a different type, in many circumstances, that allows you to go beyond the normal 6-year limit. And going beyond the limit is especially important if you were born in India or certain other countries that have a large backlog in the green card process. Now, when I talk about backlog, this is really what I'm talking about. What you see in front of you is the January Visa Bulletin. This is part of a document published each month by the U.S. Department of State. That department sets I don't want to say backlog, but they set the cutoff dates in each category in terms of who can apply for the final step in the green card process and who must continue to wait. So just as an example, if you look at my cursor where it says employment-based first, and then we go to all chargeability areas except those listed, you see a C there, which means current, which means that anybody who applies for the green card can get it. There is no backlog whatsoever. In contrast, actually stark contrast to that, if you head over to India, you can and go to the second preference, which is the category used by most physicians and others with an advanced degree. The backlog goes to March 1st, 2012. And so that means anyone whose priority date is prior to March 1st, 2012 can now start the second step of the green card process. Everybody else has to wait. So as you can see, there's more than a decade-long wait, and it's actually more than that because these priority dates change every month. Sometimes they go forward, sometimes they remain stagnant, other times they actually retrogress or go backwards, and sometimes they become unavailable completely. And so establishing a priority date really for anyone is extremely important and very helpful, and especially if someone was born in India, again, it's very helpful. So the next question is, who can apply? Well, really anybody can. You can be inside the US, you can be outside the US, and there's no specific education or job experience required. You can have a degree in medicine, you can have a degree in something else. What really is crucial, though, is that in terms of your education and experience, as we'll discuss a little later on, they have to relate to this extraordinary ability that you're claiming. In other words, if your degree is in one field, but you're claiming extraordinary ability in another field, those really don't tie together. So you really, again, it's all part of telling your story. How does this whole, as a whole, education, work experience demonstrate that you've reached a high level of accomplishment in your field? One note I wanted to make, because I know a lot of people watching today may be J1s. You may be on a J1, you may be a resident or fellow. And the J1 home residency requirement or home return requirement that you're aware of, where you're legally required to return to your home country for 2 years at the end of your training, does get in the way. Now, what I mean by that is that you either have to fulfill that requirement or receive and fulfill a J1 waiver before you're able to take full advantage of an EB-1 approval. So you can definitely get the EB-1 approval. That's not a problem. It's just a question of being able to move ahead with the second final step in the green card process. So to move ahead with that second step, if you're a J1, 2 things have to happen. Number one, again, you have to either go home for 2 years or obtain and fulfill a J1 waiver in the US. And then the other thing is that your priority date in your category has to become current. So the bottom line here is that really anyone can apply. And even if you have a J1, getting an EB-1 approval is very helpful because, again, with the backlogs the way they are, this will get you a place in the backlog. And the EB-1 backlog, as we saw just a minute ago, is much better than the 10+ year backlog in the EB-2 category, which is the standard category used for physicians and others with an advanced degree. So what are the requirements? In other words, how do we demonstrate to the Immigration Service, or how do you demonstrate that you're extraordinary? Well, in the regulations, they actually lay it right out in black and white. And this is the slide that you see in front of you. Now, one way is to show that you've won some type of major prize, such as a Nobel Prize, or I've filed applications for people who have won Rhodes scholarships. So if you've won such a major award, that's really all you need to show. I mean, you'll need to explain why it's relevant, why it's important, but it really does speak for itself. With that being said, most people have not won a Nobel Prize or Rhodes Scholarship. And because of that, the Immigration Service has listed some other ways to demonstrate that you are extraordinary. And out of the bullet points that you see, it's a requirement that you show 3 or more. So the minimum is 3. And what I like to do, though, is to show as many as possible. It's always best to provide more information rather than just the minimum that they're asking for. So with that being said, let's briefly go over them, and then I'll have some more comments as we go along. So 3 of the following: nationally or internationally recognized prizes or awards for excellence, memberships and associations in the field that demand outstanding achievement. So just as a quick note for memberships, this is memberships in organizations or associations that are selective in terms of who they invite to be a member. So it's not just like paying your dues and becoming a member of some type of professional organization that allows everybody to join. This is membership in very selective organizations that require demonstrated excellence. And among other things, if you use this criteria as part of your extraordinary ability filing, it's important to include evidence from the organization showing that what the criteria are that they use when they are selecting people to invite for membership. Next, publish material about you in a professional journal or trade publication or other type of publication, such as if your work has been exhibited in newspapers general circulation, or you're written about in professional journals. Next, you've been asked to judge the work of others, either individually or on a panel, such as if you serve as a reviewer for a professional journal, or if you serve as an official mentor for other people and have that type of mentoring relationship. You know, anything where you are being relied upon to use your expertise in the field to assist others in the field at a high level. Next, original scientific, scholarly, or business-related contributions of major significance to the field. So this is original research you've done, research that you're working on with others, perhaps, new findings, things that are of importance to you and also to the field. And then this goes right along also with the next criteria, which is authorship of scholarly articles in professional or major trade publications or other major media. So the writing of articles about new discoveries or new procedures or other things like that of significance, things that are significant enough to the field that they are considered and then accepted for publication in professional journals or in other types of media. And then the last 2 usually don't apply to residents and fellows, but definitely apply to others who are farther along in their career. And they include your performance of a leading or critical role in a distinguished organization. And then finally, a person who commands a high or other significantly, well, the high salary or other high or significantly high remuneration in relation to others in the field. So one thing that I wanted to note at this point also is that showing 3 or showing 5 of the criteria is really crucial. In fact, to get in the door, so to speak, at the Immigration Service, you have to show at least 3. With that being said, what the regulations don't say, and what is really very important about this, is that the Immigration Service has discretion when they're reviewing the evidence that you provide. Some people, when I speak to them, they tell me, you know, Mike, I've got evidence of 3, or I have evidence of 5 of these, so it should be approved. And my response is usually, you know, your qualifications are outstanding. You, in my opinion, you definitely meet the criteria. However, there's an element of discretion at the Immigration Service. And what that means is that they can review the evidence and say, yes, you have met all the requirements, we're going to approve this. Or what they say sometimes is, you know, you have given us good evidence of 3 or 4, but not good enough. So there's that element of discretion at the very end of the adjudication process that is really the key to everything. And that's why it's so important that when you're considering this type of green card application, that you really think through, what is my story? What am I trying to communicate to this individual officer who's in a cubicle at a large processing center, who probably has 30 of these on his or her desk to look through today or over the next couple of days? What is it that is compelling? So not only meeting these requirements, but putting them together, having a compelling story to the extent that the officer wants to use his or her discretion to go ahead and approve your application. So next, when you file the application, I mean, the application form itself is an I-140. It looks very simple. It's biographic information, and really not much more than that. So when people look at it, they're thinking, wow, this is not so complicated. This application is very simple. I'll list my name, my date of birth, etc. Well, the I-140 application is just the start. It's really the supporting evidence that is the key to every single case. And as this slide says, there is really no straightforward test. There's no bright line test to define or to determine whether you qualify. Again, it's, as I mentioned before just a minute ago, it's up to the officer who is reviewing your case, and thus the evidence needs to be as compelling as possible. So among the key pieces of evidence, a personal statement, that's really your letter to the officer explaining the compelling nature of your case. What is it that is so special about what you do and what you've accomplished that the officer should really consider approving your application? Next, 4 letters of recommendation. It can be 4, it could be 3 or 7. And we'll discuss this in just a minute. But really the key is that they have to be strong letters, compelling letters, and not just letters that say you're a nice physician, you're a good practitioner, you have a lot of potential, you're a nice young physician, these sort of things. These letters cannot speculate on what may come in the future. The approval of an EB-1 extraordinary ability case is based on what have you done up to now, up to the filing date of this application, and not what you might accomplish in the future, because that's all speculative. If you or an applicant includes a lot of evidence, letters, etc., about what may happen in the future or what you may do in the future, the Immigration Service officer will undoubtedly, and I've seen this happen before, issue either a request for more evidence or possibly even a denial saying that, in a nutshell, you have good qualifications, but there's just too much speculation here about what may happen in the future because we don't know. It may happen, it may not. You may have these wonderful accomplishments, or maybe you won't. So the focus is really, what have you done up to today or up to the date that you filed the EB-1 application, whether it's now, this year, next year, or whenever. Next is a copy of your curriculum vitae. And just a quick note about that. The CV is really important. It's your chance to list all of your accomplishments, published articles, and other things. What I would recommend not doing is having it so that it's triple spaced and turning a, let's say, 2 or 3 page CV into a 10-page CV. The officers know all about this. Some other lawyers do recommend that you have huge margins and lots of spacing, and so that all of a sudden your CV goes from 2 to 3 pages of properly formatted information to something that's 10 pages and just is consisting mostly of blank space with some information filled in. The officers know right away, in my opinion, and some other lawyers may have a different opinion, but if you make something look like it's trying to be longer than it really is, that may be an alarm bell to the officer that, look, this person may have some really good accomplishments, but they're trying to make it into more than it really is. Your goal is to present a truthful story of what you've done, to take pride in all of the hard work you've done, but not to try and puff up what you've done by adding extra pages of blank space and blank stuff. Next, of course, copies of your articles and book chapters if you've written them, or other material published about you, copies of published articles about you and your work, and then proof of membership in these associations we spoke of, evidence that you're a journal reviewer, etc. Also, if you've won awards, evidence of the awards, anything else that would tend to show that you are a person who has accomplished a lot and deserves to get an approval in this category. The personal statement. I'd like to spend some time talking about the personal statement because it's really critically important. This is really your chance. It's when you're up to bat, so to speak, in baseball, or your bite at the apple, as they say. This is your chance to make a compelling case to the officer about what it is that makes your work, your accomplishments so special. The officer will read it, and the officer is not a scientist, is not a physician. The officer has some type of college degree, that much I can tell you, but it could be in anything. And with that being said, you want to make it compelling. You don't want to make it into a scientific paper. You don't want to use complicated medical terms, or if you do, you want to make sure you define them, because you want to make sure that you do not lose the officer's attention or patience. So as the slide says, it can be hard for you to write about yourself. A lot of people are very modest, and this is the time not to be modest. This is the time to talk about what you've done, to take pride in everything you've done, and to explain what you've done and the importance of what you've done. It's not the time to be modest. And once you write it, have family members, colleagues, professors, mentors, other people go over it to make sure that it's a compelling story and also that you're not being too modest. Again, this is your chance to really, really tell your story. Talk about your goals and why that's important and what progress you've already made towards the goal, what you've done. People ask me whether there's a preferred length. Should it be 1 page? Should it be 2 pages? What is too long? What is not long enough? When is the officer going to lose interest? So I will tell you that there is really no particular length. I would say, of course, at least 1 page, preferably more. But the key is really to make sure that it's compelling and that there's no information in there that is not helpful. You want, as they say in football, you want to move the football down the field. So every paragraph, every sentence in that personal statement needs to move the football a little bit farther down the field. There should be no paragraphs where the officer feels like the letter is stalling out. Because I will tell you, the officer will start wondering, what's for lunch today? When is my next donut break? How many other cases do I have to review today? I have, tomorrow off, etc. It's almost like writing the script of a television show, honestly. In other words, it's got to be compelling. It's got to be dramatic. I know, again, that we all tend to be modest, and a lot of times we like to talk about what we've done in terms that others in our field understand, and that's true of lawyers and accountants and everybody else. But in this case, it should be in layman's terms, it should be dramatic, and it should move the ball down the field. So what you don't want to do is, as I say at the very end of this current slide, is what you don't want to do is have stuff in there that's not important, not relevant, and does not move the ball down the field. So things like what you did in high school, an award you won in 10th grade, your undergrad years, or anything else that may have been a wonderful accomplishment at that time, but in the professional realm is really not an accomplishment. It's not something that this officer will put any weight on in terms of determining whether you're excellent in your field. So even though you were, of course, very proud of what you accomplished in high school, grade school, college, etc., it's not going to help show that you're of extraordinary ability in your field. And so I always recommend to everybody that they not put any information about this stuff in there unless there's something extremely compelling that goes to the heart of what you're currently doing and that shows the officer that since grade school or since high school or what have you, this is all part of a whole that has led you to the accomplishments that you're making today. So winning basic awards in high school, university, etc., just is not worthwhile. It's not helpful, and you will lose the officer's attention very, very quickly. And when you lose their attention, you're never going to get it back. Next, let's talk about letters of recommendation. Letters of recommendation are very important. They can be very helpful if they're written properly and by the right people, or they can be just extra pieces of paper that the officer is going to kind of maybe scan through and then keep looking for other stuff that better tells your story. So on average, I would say over the last 30 years, most clients provide about 4 to 5 letters. The regulations don't require any specific number of letters. 4 to 5 is the average. Some people provide more. It's also possible in certain cases that there are less letters. Really, the key is that they're outstanding letters. Each one has to be outstanding and has to add something to your case. In terms of who would write the letters, some can come from mentors, people that you know personally, program director, for instance, if you're a resident or fellow. Some should come from people that you've collaborated with, such as if you've collaborated with other physicians or scientists or others at other institutions or even in other countries. And then it's also very helpful to get a letter from someone who knows of your work, but has never either worked with you, has never directly supervised your work, but can comment as an expert on the outstanding, extraordinary nature of your work. The way the Immigration Service looks at letters, and this is based on my many years of experience, is that they definitely give letters weight. There's no doubt about it. But what I've seen is that they tend to give more weight to letters that don't come from people who you are currently working with or reporting to. What I've seen is the Immigration Service take the position that and this is their position and not mine, certainly, that of course you work with this person, so of course they're going to write a letter for you. They will say whatever you want them to because they're your coworker, they're your mentor, they're your supervisor, etc. And for that reason, it's nice to have letters come from various sources and not just your institution, to show the strength of what you've done. Another question I get is, well, how about letters coming from out of the country? Well, that's absolutely fine. I always recommend at least a couple letters from the United States, and other letters can come from the US or from elsewhere. Really, the key is that in all of these letters, that the recommenders need to introduce themselves and explain who they are and why their opinion matters. That the fact that they're an expert in the field, that they are a professor, or they have reached a high level in the field, or they have many years of experience, they have themselves written articles, won awards, etc. So it's important because the officers will not only look at the text of the letters, they want to know who are these people, and not only who they are, but what is the importance, or how much weight should I give to their opinion? Why does their opinion matter? Is this a person who is a colleague of the person who's applying, who has no more years of experience than the person who's applying? Or is this someone who's been out in the field for many years, has written articles, and has won awards? And so with each letter, we always recommend that a paragraph at the beginning, and really no more than that, that the writer explain who they are and why their opinion is important. It doesn't say it on the slide, but I also usually like to attach a copy of the person's own CV so that the officer can page through it and see for themselves that this person really has the authority, the experience, and the credentials to give an educated, informed, and very reliable opinion about someone's accomplishments in the field. We won't spend too much time on this. This is more just like a logistics slide. But basically, the application steps and timeline, as you can see: gathering necessary documents, letters of recommendation, writing the personal statement. I mean, it really depends. There's no specific number of days or weeks or months that this takes. It all depends on how long does it take you to write your personal statement, or obtain letters of recommendation, and get everything together, and either then put the case together or have a lawyer put it together and really make the most compelling case. Once everything is filed, and it's filed in one package along with this I-140 application that I mentioned, if it's filed via premium processing, that means that the Immigration Service will do the processing in 15 days or less. Now, they can approve it during that time, or they can deny it during that time, or they can issue a request for more evidence. But at least you'll get some type of response within the 15 days. Now, if they should issue a request for more evidence, or an RFE, what they do is they stop the clock. And once you provide whatever it is that they're looking for, they will then take up to another 15 calendar days to make a final decision. Now, premium processing is expensive. Currently, it's $2,500 over and above the standard I-140 filing fee of $700. The premium processing filing fee is scheduled to go up in February by a little bit over $300. So it'll be $2,805. Now, without premium, there is definitely standard processing, and that's about 3 to 6 months, more or less. Immigration Service processing times are very fluid. It depends on their current process, what they're focusing on at the moment. Sometimes there's a focus on one type of application to the detriment of other types, and then they seem to kind of go back and forth. Whenever they feel like too much of one type of application may be piling up, they may assign extra adjudicators to that type of application to get it back down to a reasonable level, and then other types of applications in the meantime will continue to sit and not be adjudicated. So standard processing time of about 3 to 6 months. It could be 8 months, it could be 2 months. It's really impossible to pin it down to a more precise number. There are 4 types of responses, whether you file the application premium or standard. The first is the approval, and of course, that's what everybody wants. Next is a request for evidence. This can be anything from 1 page to 5 pages. It can be a simple request for, hey, we would like a better copy of your medical degree, or we'd like a better copy of your I-94 card, or we can't make out your transcript that you provided of your degree, your course or mark sheets. All the way to something that could be a 5-page monstrosity where the officer is asking for everything under the sun, and I mean, it's good that they're giving you an opportunity to provide more stuff, but it's starting to look like there's a chance that this will not be approved. You can tell a lot from the tone and tenor of an RFE, or request from evidence. Some of them just want some more stuff. They just want one or two more things. It's a pretty quick thing. It's not a major deal. And you can tell that there's a better than not chance that the officer is probably going to approve the application upon receipt of this additional documents. On the other hand, if you get a long RFE with a million requests and you can tell that the tone is not a positive tone, it's more like giving you a chance to send him some stuff, and the officer will review it, but it just feels like this is probably not going to be an approval. You should still respond, because you never know. It's really not possible to get into the mind of the adjudicator, and maybe on a different day, when the adjudicator pulls up your case again, once you provide the new documents, that officer or adjudicator may have a totally different view of your case, may look at it again and say, actually, you know what? This person has provided all this extra stuff. I'm actually going to approve this one. I think this is a very strong case now. And then you've got your approval. The last two are the negative responses. The NOID, N-O-I-D, or Notice of Intent Denied, is like an RFE, but there's one major difference. And the difference is this. The officer is telling you that the officer intends to deny this application. The officer is giving you a chance to provide some more stuff, more documents, articles, what have you, but is letting you know that there's a better than not chance that no matter what you can provide anything under the sun, that this application will probably be denied unless there is some startling new evidence that has come to light that you forgot to include in your original filing. So right away, you know that, of course, you want to respond to this, but that the chances of an approval are very, very slim at this point. Lastly, of course, is the denial. That's not anything that anybody wants to see. These applications are totally discretionary, as you know. And when a person does get a denial, the denial usually does include a written decision as to why. In other words, what were the problems with the case? What were the deficiencies? How is it that you did not meet the requirements for this type of application? Sometimes the denials are actually very helpful, because it will allow you to regroup and maybe refile again with additional documents, maybe wait a little while and try and meet the deficiencies mentioned in the denial. Other times, when you read these denials, you just shake your head, like I do, because you met the requirements, you really are extraordinary, but the officer is just saying, look, you're just not good enough. I mean, today, on this specific day, as I'm reviewing your application, you are good, but just not good enough. That's a very disheartening type of denial, because the officer is really saying, look, you're there, but you're just not, you're at the 1 yard line, let's say, and you're almost there, but you're not quite. A different officer, a different day, it very well could have been an approval. To just go on, if hopefully, of course, you get the approval. Once you have the approval, you can then go ahead with the final step in the green card process. Really, two requirements for that. One is when a visa number is available, meaning that there's either no backlog in the category, or your place in the backlog is current, and also that you have met any other requirements, such as fulfilling the J1 requirement that you either return home for 2 years, or that you'll fulfill your J1 waiver if you've received one. There are two ways to do the last step. I won't go into too much detail on those, but there's a way to do the final step in the US, which is a process known as adjustment of status. The nice thing about that is it's done entirely in the US. Currently, there are very, very few interviews, which means that it's just filing the application documents, and at some point, normally, they will advise you of an approval and send you the green card. I mean, the application process requires a medical exam and other things, but it's done in the US. Consular processing is where, instead of the US process, you would go through the National Visa Center, which is part of the US Department of State. And then finally, you would have a mandatory personal interview at the US Embassy or at a US consulate, normally back in your home country. If you have family members, they would also go through the interview. There are certain situations where you would want to do consular processing. Most people do adjustment. It's really case by case, but I would say a great majority of people just do the process in the US because they're eligible for it, and it saves them the trouble of having to go to the US Embassy or consulate in a foreign country. What happens if the petition is denied? Just very quickly, over 30 years, and I can tell you, based on that experience, it has no impact on your ability to get a green card in the future. That's the question that I get most often is, Mike, I know there's a lot of discretion, when you file my application, what if it is denied? Thankfully, there has been no impact whatsoever. Um, I mean, honestly, I have filed green card applications in the same category or other categories for people who have had a denial, and there was no problem getting approval on the green card eventually in either the same category, other category. So the Immigration Service looks at each application de novo, which is a term we learn in law school, and Latin, which basically means new. You file an NIW application, which is a different type of green card, and we'll actually cover that in a future presentation. But it's not as if the immigration officer will say, "Well, I see you have an EB-1 denial last year, or last week, or last month. Well, that means you must not be a good applicant for a green card. So even though this NIW application looks great, I'm going to deny it because I'm denying it because you have a denial already, and that officer must know something that I don't." So that never, ever happens. So that's really the nice thing about the extraordinary ability green card is there is no risk, no negative impact if you give it a try. People are always worried that, maybe I'm not good enough. I only get one shot at this. And thankfully, that's not true. There have been a number of cases over the years where I have filed, let's say, an EB-1 extraordinary ability, was denied. A week later, we get an EB-2 national interest waiver approval, or even file another extraordinary ability, get lucky, get a different adjudicating officer, and get an approval. So the good thing is this doesn't harm you in any way. It doesn't ruin your immigration future to the US. And that's really one of the keys to this process. And it's a key because, as you know, and as I've said over and over, they have so much discretion with this type of application that it's important to know that it's not going to risk your future. So let's talk about people who are not quite ready to apply yet. They're looking at a timeline of a year, 2 years, 5 years. What is it that you can do as a resident, a fellow, a practicing physician, or an IT professional, an engineer, a chemist, an accountant, even maybe a lawyer, to prepare the way, to pave the path to a successful EB-1 extraordinary ability application? So let's look over some of these things that you can do. Number one, you can conduct research. If you're not already doing research, maybe start, or if you're doing research, continue. Publish material, preferably as one of the primary authors. Publishing is important, but the way the Immigration Service looks at it, and I say this again based on experience, if you're the 10th author on a number of articles, they know very well that authors on articles are usually listed in terms of their contributions to the article. So being first or second is important. Third is great, but being 8th, 9th, 10th is very nice. But the officers look at that and wonder, and may even ask, what was your contribution to this article? Did you make some charts? Did you just collect some data? Did you do some of the writing? What is it that you did? Did you have any type of substantial participation in this article? Next, collaborate with others in your field who can eventually, in the future, write letters of recommendation for you. Again, it's really key to have a number of people who, when the time comes to write such letters, are willing to do so. And not just willing to do so, but can honestly attest to the outstanding, excellent nature of your work, rather than just saying, yes, we have worked with him or her. This person is a nice person, a good person, a good young researcher, a good young IT person or engineer. And again, that's not going to help. It has to be letters of substance and letters that discuss the importance of what you've done and the very high level of achievement that you have. Next, engage in peer review activities, such as being a journal reviewer. Journals are always looking for reviewers. And I know as residents, fellows, or whatever you're doing, lawyers too, I can attest to this, we're all extremely busy these days, busier than ever with more work and lots of it. So doing things like being a journal reviewer on top of your normal work, I know it just is more time yet committed to something else. On the other hand, this will help pave the way to hopefully a very successful extraordinary ability application. Because as mentioned earlier on, this shows that you are reviewing the work of others in your field, that your voice is important, and that your expertise is being used by the journal to determine whether or not to publish articles, which they will only publish if they're novel, important, and relevant, and make a difference. Next, applying for membership in organizations that require excellence in your field. Again, as you know, that's one of the criteria that they use, and obtaining membership in such organizations is very helpful. You'll want to make sure, though, that they really do require excellence and that it can be documented either via information from the website or other types of written documentation showing that it really does require excellence to be invited for membership. Next, get grant funding. Of course, that would be terrific. Obviously not so easy to do, but grant funding shows the importance of your work, because whether it's NIH or some other type of grant, public, private, it shows that someone or some organization feels that what you're doing or what you're about to do is important, and important enough to support with financial support. And then lastly, take up leadership positions in organizations in your field. Really self-explanatory, but that sort of thing shows that you're at a higher level in your field, and can be very useful in showing that you have reached a high level of achievement in your field. And I will say that, I didn't list a ton of suggestions here, but going along with the ones that I have listed, anything else that shows that you are at a very high level in your field, any kind of indication of achievement is important. So even if it's not one of these listed here, anything that is noteworthy, that is important, that can be documented, and that will get the officer's attention in a positive way is very helpful. And in terms of a question I get from people, whether they're new residents or a new IT professional or a new engineer who has just started out, when should I apply? When is the right time? Is it 1 year? Is it 2 years? Is it 4 years? Is it now? Etc. There's really no good answer. I mean, you want to make the strongest case possible. And whether that's now or a year from now, that's really going to be up to you to try and determine, when are you going to be able to take your best shot? You don't want to, on the one hand, you don't want to do it too early when you don't have much to show. On the other hand, you also don't want to wait 10 or 15 years, because then that would really negate the benefits of this type of application. So with that being said, we'll switch gears just a little bit and take some questions. Before I take questions, though, I would like to say a couple things. First of all, I'd like to give sincere thanks to two special people who really helped a lot with this presentation. My chief legal assistant and right-hand person, Carolyn Taylor, did an outstanding job helping me with this presentation, and gave me some very thought-provoking ideas, things to think about and things to include in this presentation. She is wonderful, and I really would like to thank her for everything that she does. And also Jeff Bumbales, who is a wonderful technical assistant. With Jeff's help, we're going to actually post a copy of this video and probably also a transcript on our website. The website is shermanimmigration.com, and hopefully the video and transcript will go up very soon. And this way you can review the video transcript if you like, or people who were not available to attend the meeting today can do so. And again, the website is shermanimmigration.com. Quick word about our next session before questions. So the next session next month, 4 weeks from now, will be on marriage-based green cards, and the process, the procedure, what's involved, and what does it mean. So hope you'll join us for that one if you're interested, and if you have any friends or colleagues who may be interested, please feel free to spread the word, and we'd love to have everyone join us for that presentation. So with that being said, we're gonna get back here and stop the sharing. There we go. Okay, so I'd like to thank you again, all of you, for joining us today. And in terms of questions, if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. And I'll say one thing that my doctor says to me very often, which is, once you leave my office, or in this case, the virtual office, if you have a question that you meant to ask or thought about asking, but forgot to, feel free to email me at mike@shermanimmigration.com. So that's mike@shermanimmigration.com. I'm always very happy to hear from everyone, be happy to answer questions, and even schedule a consultation if that's what you would like to do. But for basic questions, mike@shermanimmigration.com. For people who've known me a long time, I have another email address that I've had for more than 30 years. I'll give it to you just because some people find it easier to remember. And that's greencards@aol.com. Now, I know that dates me. And my wife has said that maybe you shouldn't be using the AOL address anymore because it makes you seem like an old lawyer. But regardless, I have it. I still check it. I think it's cool because um, I tried to get greencard@aol.com, but must have missed it by 5 minutes because a lawyer in Chicago took it back in the day. So I became Green Cards and have been greencards@aol.com since then. Thank you very much, Ginger, Kelly, for the wonderful comments that you put in the chat box. I appreciate it very much, and thank you guys for joining, and thank everybody for joining us today. I hope it's been helpful, and again, it's a nice option for people who meet the requirements or may meet the requirements. It's a nice way of getting a green card without having to rely on a specific employer. It allows you freedom of movement around the U.S., freedom of jobs. You're not stuck with, or I don't want to say stuck, but you're not required to remain with a specific employer for any specific period of time. And so it gives you a lot of options for the future. For those of you who are involved in GME, whether you're program directors, program managers, coordinators, feel free to spread the word about this or other sessions to your residents and fellows that perhaps someone has said to you they're interested in getting a green card. They're not quite sure how to go about it because they're currently a resident or fellow, and they know that a resident job or fellow job really legally cannot serve as the basis of an employment-based green card. Years ago, when I was a very new lawyer, and this goes way back, the green card process took 1 to 3 months. And so in many cases, it literally was possible to get a green card as a resident if you had an H-1B visa, which many people did back then. Now the green card process not only doesn't take that little bit of time anymore, but the U.S. Department of Labor has said since that time that because residents and fellow positions are temporary in nature, it is not legal to use them to sponsor a green card. A green card, employment-based green card, can only be sponsored by or based on a normal, regular, permanent job, and not one that has an ending date. So with that note, thank you again all very much for joining us. For those of you in Michigan, I hope you're all staying warm. Let's hope for an early spring. For those of you who may be joining us from elsewhere where it's warm, sunny, hopefully, maybe you can send us some warm, sunny weather here to Michigan. We could really use it. At least at this point, it may warm up here next week a little bit. But thank you again. And again, any questions, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm always happy to hear from anyone. So just one last quick note, if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat room. Otherwise, seeing none, I'd like to end the session. And again, thank you all so much for joining us today, and appreciate your time, and hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. So thank you all very much.